Welcome, everybody. I'm Bobby Ross, editor of the Christian Chronicle, and we've had a few conversations in recent months about racial issues, racial justice, and some of the conversations that have started in our country. I guess ongoing long-term conversations that we've had in some ways forever that have kind of been reignited, starting with the terrible shooting that happened in Minneapolis of George Floyd, who was shot in Minneapolis police custody, and most recently in the last week or so, there's been a shooting of a black man named Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who was shot 7 times in the back, and a lot of things have happened. A lot of discussions have occurred as a result of that. So, hoping got a panel here today of 3 brothers and a sister from Churches of Christ across the U.S., kind of just to talk about some of those issues and what you're thinking, what you're feeling, how we approach these questions from the perspective of being Christians and members of the body of Christ. And I think we'll just start by having each of the panelists do a brief introduction of yourself in the order that you're showing up on the screen. I think we'll start with Ben and then go to Kevin, and then Sammie, and then Verlon. And we'll just go ahead and start rolling and go for a little while and just see how the conversation goes.
Well, thank you, Bobby. I'm very grateful to be here, although the occasion is one kind of for concern. So my name is Ben Peterson. I'm a member at the A&M Church of Christ in College Station, Texas. I'm also a graduate student at Texas A&M University in political science. I just want to say I'm certainly not an expert on these issues that we're going to be talking about. I'm here kind of just as a concerned citizen and in a church member, and I think it's very important we're having these conversations. I've certainly been trying to follow the Christian Chronicles discussions about these issues that over the summer, and again, very grateful to be here.
My name is Kevin Redd. I am a preaching minister at the Millington Church of Christ, which is about 11 miles north of Memphis, Tennessee. I also, like Ben, don't claim to be an expert on this subject. I do a little bit of writing on it. And as a member of the Church of Christ, my goal is that the church can be an instrument of the unity for which Jesus desired, and a leader to the world for relations between human beings. And Bobby, I appreciate you putting this together, and I'm grateful to be here.
I am Sammie Berry, and I want to say to Bobby, thank you for the good work that you've been doing with the Christian Chronicle, really for many years. And I currently serve as the minister and one of the elders here at the Dallas West Church of Christ here in the city of Dallas. And Dallas West was the congregation where Botham John attended, and he was part of our ministry here, a worship leader, teacher, did some preaching, and whatever we worked with young adults, and he was very active in our congregation. When in fact the anniversary of his murder is coming up here on September the 6th. So and I'm Bobby, I appreciate the fact that we're having these discussions, because from what I'm seeing in the news, what I'm seeing in political conventions and other things, that there are some who still don't feel or realize that we have a problem here in America that needs to be addressed. So thank you for doing this. And, we don't always have to, see eye to eye on everything, but I think we should try to work toward some reasonable and workable solutions so that we can stop losing our young Black men to police violence.
So I'm Verlon Johnson. So it's great to be here. I'm a member of the Park Forest Church of Christ in Matteson, Illinois. I'm one of the co-founders of and a current team leader of our I Share Women's Ministry, where I think we do a lot of good work in the community and beyond. But I'm also the wife of a deacon at our church as well, Sean. Just so you have an understanding of where I'm coming from, probably in today's discussion, is one, I'm a leader in the community. I typically focus on issues pertaining to domestic violence, equality in healthcare, because I do have a passion for that through my work and just my life in general. And then also any issues pertaining to Black women and children as well. So you also know where I'm coming from. I'm also an executive at a Fortune 500 company. And frankly, all the issues we're talking about today, whether we're talking about at church and the community, really impacts what's happening in our workforce as well. So really I've been trying to be strategic about how we can address some of the structural and institutional racism that I think that we see within our organization as well. But most important, I am a Black woman, I'm the wife of a Black man, and I'm the mother of 2 Black children. And so it is very important for me to make sure that everything that we're doing is not just discussions, but that we have actionable results and how we can make sure that my family and the families of so many others remain safe. So those are my key issues and who I am. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you for being a part of this and taking time to join the discussion. Let's start with Jacob Blake and what's happened with his shooting and the news that's come out of that. Sister Johnson, I guess you're probably closer geographically than anybody to that. Your church is maybe 100 miles from Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Yeah, exactly. Very close. And I mean, clearly, you know, we're within the city of Chicago, and I think early on you would have seen a lot of issues and heard a lot more about that type of dynamic from a Chicago perspective. But to be honest with you, just to put it into perspective, Kenosha is a relatively small town, sleepy town, great opportunity to get out there every now and then. We have a couple of events. And this is just something that really rocked our world. One, we've already been raising this issue quite a lot, and you would think that the community as a whole and would understand the need to address these issues right on target, right? So to hear something like this was honestly just devastating. That it's happening, you know, right after we've had so many other issues and so many other conversations like this, right? Where you see police forces across the country and community leaders and others really kind of banding together and saying, hey, enough is enough. Let's figure out how to fix this problem. And then to see it happen in a town like Kenosha was just really hard for all of us. So, and of course, like you said, being so close to Chicago has just really rocked our world a lot.
What about others of you? Do you have, I guess, thoughts or kind of how have you reacted to this latest shooting? Are you numb to it at this point, or just, I guess the basic storyline is that he was shot 7 times in the back, and most people, the reaction seems to be, this is an open and shut case of police brutality, although I wrote this down because I read it in a Wall Street Journal story just this morning where a government official there in Kenosha was saying the shooting was a snippet of a much larger situation, basically trying to say that, yeah, he was shot 7 times in the back, but we don't know the whole story. I'm just...
Hey, Bobby, I'll start, or I'll continue the discussion on that.
Okay.
You know, one of the problems that we have, and this has been the case historically, is over policing. And I think here's another clear case. He's shot 7 times in the back. But then I also find out that, you know, he's paralyzed waist down, and his ankles are handcuffed to the hospital bed. I mean, you know, I really struggle with that. And Bobby, before this call, I was on a call with 3 police chiefs here in the Dallas area. Well, I wasn't on the call. Let me rephrase that. I was viewing a call that they were having, and I wasn't participating, just listening. And this issue came up about, well, being transparent and let's hear the whole story. Well, and police unions always take that position to say, well, we don't want to rush to judgment. Let's hold on. Let's get the whole story. But, when Amber Geiger murdered Botham Jean, she didn't wait to get the whole story. She saw a black man eating ice cream in an apartment and assumed that he had broken in and he was stealing stuff. Didn't wait to get the whole story. So I think that's why people struggle, with the police culture. And I really believe it's a cultural issue in these police departments, and where they cover for, they protect bad officers with this type of rhetoric of, well, let's get the whole story. And I don't even believe it was a deadly force situation. If it was, wouldn't one shot be enough? I also heard, and I'm going to stop with this, a interview from his father, and his father, Jacob asked his father, why did they shoot me 7 times? And I'll stop there.
And his father, I think his response was, baby, they shouldn't have shot you at all.
Right, yeah.
I think there is some validity to the whole story, but we cannot limit that validity to who the whole story fits. There is absolutely a much greater story of this whole thing that involves even the history between black people and police officers, or even black people and authority in America, where you could have historically a black slave who's subject to the black owner, and that black owner or white owner, and that slave owner could put him in a tree and whip him or hang him or beat him, or the history of people like Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was shot in Alabama by a police officer while he was unarmed, and all the things that we've seen. We've got to consider that history too, because if you don't, that's, I think, where we can get into some miscommunication and misunderstanding. That history is there, and it is at the forefront of black men's mind. And so I don't believe that you can just come into a situation and suddenly say, we are police authority figures and now we're your friend. Well, the history has not been friendly. And if we're going to address this going forward, we do have to look at the bigger picture, but we have to look at the bigger picture as it pertains to both police and black communities.
So Bobby, I'll share kind of my reaction to the shooting of Jacob Blake. Okay. Just going off of, looking at the videos that were available, and some of the other, just reading on CNN. I do think it demonstrates the need for, the continued focus on reforms. There are a lot of things I think that are concerning about the case. I mean, something that's already been mentioned. I mean, it seems excessive to shoot someone 7 times in the back. On the other hand, I'm not prepared to pass judgment based just on what I've seen. I would contrast this case a little bit with the death of George Floyd. A small nitpick, Bobby, you mentioned George Floyd wasn't shot. This is the case where Derek Chauvin had his knee on his neck for almost 9 minutes. And when you see that video, I mean, it's a fairly clear cut. You can definitely see why he was charged with murder and everything. And so I don't think, based on what I've seen of this particular case, that I'm ready, the case of Jacob Blake, that I'm ready to pass judgment. Though I absolutely think it it raises concerns. And also it's also been mentioned his treatment in the hospital. All of these things, I think, raise concern. Another point, I mean, one avenue, seemingly low-hanging fruit, you might say, for reform, the cops were not wearing body cams in this situation, is my understanding. And so that's a problem. I mean, that seems like something that ought to be a focus. I mean, as citizens, we're kind of reliant on people having to video some of these events. And if that video weren't there, then that changes the situation in terms of the possibility of accountability for officers. So those are some of the things going through my head. I certainly think this should be investigated and be under review. I'm not quite ready to pass judgment on the particular case.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you correcting me on that. I'm assuming I said that Floyd was shot instead of the actual manner of death, and I apologize for that mistake. Well, I guess the other thing that, in Kenosha, we call it a small city of about 100,000 people, which to me 100,000 is a little, maybe a medium-sized city, but by the same respect, regardless, you've got a community that's not used to the national spotlight, and suddenly there's just, people are there protesting righteous indignation, this shooting that has made a lot of questions, but at the same time, there's been violence, there's been looting, and we've seen this same situation occur in other locales. Portland has had a lot of some peaceful protest and some violence, and suddenly we've got a situation where we've got people and I know there's more than two sides, but just to kind of try to see where we are, we've got people saying, Black Lives Matter, racial injustice is a big problem in this country. And then you've got situations that are turning violent, and people are turning on their TV and seeing stores looted and businesses on fire. And I think in Kenosha, you've had a situation where there were two people killed, in this case by what appears to be a white militia 17-year-old person, not anybody as far as the protesters who are protesting the shooting of Mr. Blake, as I understand it. So I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I'm just curious, this has become an issue in the presidential race. You've got the Republicans, President Trump now, basically saying that, the Democrats are going to burn down our country, and you've got the Democrats saying, well, this is happening under your watch. And I'm just wondering how do we as Christians, how do we both believe in the concept of racial justice and then try to make sense of some of these issues and questions that we're seeing related to law and order? I mean, what is to me, it's all confusing, and I don't really know how we should respond or what we should do. So I'm hoping maybe you guys have some smarter analysis or insight than I do on that question.
Bobby, I don't know if my insight is any smarter, but the way I look at this, protesting is fine, and I said that from the point in time, from the day or the day after both of them was shot. Protesting is fine, but it should be peaceful, and both of them was a man of peace, and so but riots are not acceptable. Now, unfortunately, what has happened in our country is over the years, these shootings and these killings have happened, and the police were never held accountable. When Amber Geiger was convicted, I think it's in Dallas County, it's only like the second time in, like 50 years or something. It was a long time. And so there's really a lot of elements going on here. And I had a conversation or listened to a discussion by the mayor of the city of Dallas when we were having a lot of problems here. What he pointed out is that he doesn't believe that citizens of the city of Dallas are going to tear up their city. many times it's individuals coming in from the outside causing problems, like the young man with the rifle or the gun who shot 3 and killed 2. But that type of behavior is really unacceptable, and we don't condone that. But the problem is, historically, the message has been sent, and this goes all the way back to Rodney King, by the way. It was only until people started to tear up the city of LA that President Bush 1 said, hey, I think we have a problem here in our country. And so the message is out there that if you do things peacefully, well, they're going to keep killing us, they're going to keep pushing it under the rug, they're going to let the police officers move from one force to another. And so I think that's why from the top, we have to have people who, one, acknowledge there's a problem. And during the Republican convention this week, I think there were several that said, hey, racism's not a problem here in America. So until we acknowledge that there is a problem and then sit down to start trying to address it, people are going to continue to react in the way that they are. And what we've got to do, and then I'm going to try to stop here, what we have to do is, and to a certain degree, the riots and things are a reaction. They are a reaction. And the reason that people are reacting that way is we don't have an appropriate response to the issues of our day. And one reason we don't have an appropriate response is we won't acknowledge that there is a problem.
I like what Brother Barry said about being held accountable. And that's really where I think the church in particular can be of influence. We need to hold each other accountable, not only to ourselves and to the image of Christ that we're trying to project on our communities, but we've got to hold ourselves accountable to God. And I think whenever you have police officers who are policing as if they are accountable to their police director or their sheriff instead of accountable to God, you end up with the things that we see. It's the same thing that happened with Cain and Abel. If Cain holds himself accountable to God, then he does not murder Abel. And if there is a way that Christian people can challenge our leaders in the church and our leaders in the community to hold themselves accountable to God, I think we can get somewhere, at least start to get somewhere. I do not believe that we're going to solve this problem outside of spirituality or outside of a relationship to God. We have got to find that place where we are holding each other, and police officers are holding themselves, and protesters are holding themselves accountable to a higher power instead of a man just like the rest of us.
Yeah, 100% I agree with you. I think that what we sometimes miss, though, as Christians, is that we don't really want to talk about this issue, right? I mean, I applaud the Christian Chronicle and you, Bobby, and really trying to push this issue further and to make us talk about it. But a lot of people aren't ready for that. It's very uncomfortable, right, to talk about what may be a huge issue and really is a huge issue in our country. And what I like to tell people is that it's uncomfortable to experience it, actually more so than to talk about it. Because again, as a Black woman, as a woman married to a Black man, as a woman, a mother of 2 Black children, and as an executive in corporate America, I experience it there every day. And through other ways, I am sure that I experience it throughout my volunteer work and actually at church. And we've had these kind of conversations before too, because racism isn't just what's in our hearts, right? Because we love Jesus. We love Jesus, right? And we really want to do right by him, right? This is why we're all here, and we're worshiping together and praising him and speaking about all the goodness that he has, right? But it's not really about us in our heart. It's actually what's in our society. It's beyond that. And so unless, as Brother said earlier, that we actually sit down, we identify what the issues are, we talk about it, and as I said before, we have actionable measures to make sure that this issue is going away, it's not going to go away. And so I agree, it's really sitting down together and being able to have that open and honest conversation about what's happening. Because again, it's not what's in our heart, it's not about our interpersonal relationships, but it is about our relationship with God, and we have to understand, how do we talk to him, how do we look for guidance from him, and how do we come together as a church community to address those issues even more so. And I think once we can get to that point, then we can actually have more conversations like this that are actually that become even more meaningful, and that we can actually move the needle further.
Ben, I think I put you in a somewhat awkward position as the only white panelist here today, but I am curious, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts or insights on what you're seeing from your perspective.
Sure. No, I don't think that's an awkward thing. I agree with a whole lot of the analysis kind of that I've heard. I mean, the idea that there are serious problems that need to be addressed related to racial disparities and systemic racism in terms of the policing in this country. I also really completely agree with the idea that the church ought to be kind of we ought to be kind of a unique witness in this moment. And I don't think we do that by sort of attaching ourselves to one or the other of the political party platforms that are sort of on offer about how to deal with the unrest and everything that we're seeing. I think we have to there is a sort of Christian social witness or political witness that we ought to be striving for and taking our bearings from. So I agree with a lot of that. I also agree with the idea that accountability for wrongdoing is an issue when it occurs. It's very hard. I think there are some structural reasons for that. One concern that I do have, and that I think is kind of related to some of this, you talked about the law and order kind of rhetoric. I'm not so much referring to sort of protesting and looting and rioting. I'm not referring to that. My concern is that as we try to pursue reform efforts around policing, which I think is absolutely essential, like some of the other panelists have said, I am concerned that we have to keep in mind that there is a potential. We are seeing in some places rising levels of violent crime in some major cities, and so my concern is that the thing about that is that minorities, Black and Hispanic people, there are disparities related to the policing system, but there's also shocking disparities in terms of victimhood of violent crime. And so one concern I have is that as we pursue reform efforts, that we don't sort of inadvertently sort of hamstring police or utterly delegitimize police such that such that crime will rise and minorities, I think, will bear the brunt of that, particularly in poor communities. And so that's one concern I have that I think needs to be sort of part of the conversation around addressing the very real problems with abuse of police power. I think that's what I'll just say for now.
Okay, appreciate that. Any response to what the concern Ben raised before I move on to the next question?
Well, I will just say a couple of things about that. I think that because of the crime in the Black community is what has really led to a lot of what I believe is over policing, and really what we need is community policing. And I think that's going to help. I think we as Black individuals in the Black community should be held accountable to address some of these crime issues. But I also feel that there may be there's a deeper message, I think, here that that the police officers are trying to send us, um, and so it's something that we really need to stop and analyze and take a look at, because I think it seems to me that officers may be in some cases, looking past certain things, so to speak, and allowing things to happen to call attention to it. So we have to be very, very careful here, because one of the, when you think about, let's say, for example, in the city of New York, they had the stop and frisk policy. And when they implemented that, crime went down, the statistics went down, but it was determined to be unconstitutional just to stop a person just simply for the fact that they are Black. And so, but we don't exercise any type of policing policy like that in the white community, for example. Let me give you another example. We know the profile of people who go in and shoot up schools. The FBI knows exactly the type of individual who's going to do that. If they wanted to stop it or police it, I suppose they could begin to go to those communities where people with these profiles live and start going house to house. And, well, it wouldn't be stop and frisk, it would be knock and frisk in that case. And so I think it's a very deep issue here that needs to be looked at. But crime in our communities certainly is an issue. But I believe a lot of that responsibility is on us in the Black community to assist the police, because the policemen cannot do their jobs. They'll tell you this. They can't do their jobs without the help of the community. And so if we're in there, if we have the parents, dealing with their children and so on and so forth, all of this, then that will help with the crime.
That's great. So Ben, I do have a question and for you. So you did talk about an increase in crime over I'm assuming the last couple of months. Has that been a direct correlation with anything in particular? Do you think it's, so I won't put any words in your mouth, but just curious from your research, what are you finding?
Well, and let me clarify, this is not based on research that I'm doing. The concern I'm raising, this is trying to inform myself from people who are researching this issue. No, I think it's very complicated. I mean, it's a kind of a crazy year. I mean, there's a lot going on. And so I certainly wouldn't say this is for sure, these are resulting from protests or from delegitimation of the police that I mentioned. There are certainly scholars, Peter Moskos is one, who thinks that that is a contributing factor. Particularly, he's written about New York City. But it's his argument is that there's a longer term move away from some policies that are anti-crime units in New York City that were specifically tasked with trying to get guns off the street. And I think, just like Brother Barry mentioned, I mean, some of these policies I do think had disparate effect, racially disparate effect and incidents, and could have included bias. I absolutely agree that that's an issue. So short answer would be, I'm not necessarily claiming this is exactly the cause. I'm trying to raise that it's a potential concern, and definitely I do think that it could be a contributing factor. And also, we don't know. I mean, crime has declined since the early 90s and across the country overall dramatically. I think the concern that some scholars and journalists are raising is that we could see the loss of those gains if the sort of immediate trends, like you said, over the last couple of months, as compared to last year, if those trends continue, we could see the loss of those gains I'm just trying to raise the concern that a sort of general delegitimation of the police, as opposed to focused efforts at increasing accountability, which I think are absolutely necessary, I'm concerned that those could contribute to that. Again, I don't know if it will continue. I hope it won't. So that's kind of my position on that.
Okay, no, that was helpful. I've just heard the dynamic from a variety of different perspectives, and as for you as a researcher, was really hoping to get a little bit of clarification on where people are thinking that's lying. So that's good to hear your clarification. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I don't know if any of you have seen the articles from Sheriff David Clark where he made the statement, or allegedly made the statement, that it's not the police who need to be retrained, it's the public. And I think there's got to be accountability on both sides. You know, I agree with Brother Barry. In our Black communities, and particularly Black communities where there are a lot of violent crimes, just simply put, we have to do better. We've got to hold ourselves accountable. We've got to hold our young men accountable. We've got to teach them even what maybe some of the causes for that behavior is. But the same thing is true on the other side. Even if you look at that video of Jacob Blake, there were so many opportunities to not shoot him. He ran around the car. They even tugged at the back of his shirt. They could have tackled him. They could have grabbed him by his arms. They really didn't make much effort to not shoot him. And I think that's where we've got to do better from the police reform accountability. I don't think we should necessarily take all the power of the police away, but it seems to be in these situations, there are two options, and they're very polarized. Either you stop and do what we say, or you die, or you get shot. And neither one of those are right. There has to be another option. They could have not shot him. And I think we've got to do a better job in our communities, in our Black communities, and the communities where there are violent crimes. We've also got to do a better job with how we police those people and human beings in general.
No, I agree. I'm sorry, Bobby. I'm probably taking over as a moderator.
Oh, you're fine. This is why we're having the conversation, for me to listen.
So I would like to ask you all a question that I have really been upset by and could really use my Christian brother support on, and that is the one of the Abby Johnson. I don't know if you've heard her situation. She spoke at the RNC about other issues, which was fine. But she then came out. We were understanding that she has 7 children. One is a child who is, for all intents and purposes, a Black child. And she stated, and I believe she's in Texas as well, that she, if you look at all of her children, her sons, that her Black son would be, it's okay for him to be racially profiled by a cop, because honestly, he'd be more likely to commit a crime. And so one, I'm asking to my Texas brothers that are all here, if you've heard that story. 2, if there's relevance, if it's a true story, right? And then 3, what reaction do you have from that? Again, I'm sitting here in Chicago, the Chicago area, and very upset by it as a Black mother, right? And the fact that you would, think that that's okay, but I want to hear your guidance on where do you think I should be sitting on that particular issue?
Well, I actually have to forgive me because I'm not familiar with the story. So,
Thanks,
I'm not familiar with the story either. But just from what you've told me, I could maybe offer a reaction. I mean, I do not agree with that position. The idea that we should racially profile, directly. I mean, this is, I don't think that's, as I think Brother Barry said, is already constitutionally kind of, challenged. I don't think that's right. So I would disagree with the idea that as a matter of policy, racial profiling should be Now, let me offer what I think maybe she's trying to say. I'm not going to try to put words in her mouth or explain her. Here's what I think is part of the dynamic, and where sometimes I think people go to this kind of idea because we know that there is a disparity or a disproportion in terms of someone mentioned over policing, or kind of contact with police among, in particular, young black men, and including shootings. So last year, I think, black people are 13% of the United States population, and yet 35% or so of I don't remember if that was unarmed people who were shot or killed by the police, or just people killed by the police. But in other words, a disproportionate amount of black people, black men in particular, do interact with the police. So I'm certainly not advocating that as a matter of policy. I think, though, that fact that, for instance, there are more calls in which someone identifies a black suspect, or in which police are called into a predominantly black community. I think that is part of what accounts for kind of what was termed a little bit ago over policing, or disproportionate contact with black individuals. And so in that sense, I think that's part of what explains the results that we're seeing, if that makes sense, just as an explanatory matter. I don't think that means, I'm definitely not advocating for a policy of racial profiling. I think those are distinct. Does that make sense?
I think so.
And I wasn't familiar with that situation either, but while Ben was talking, I Googled it, and here's a quote I think that Verlon is referring to, as she says, statistically, my brown son is more likely to commit a violent offense over my white sons. I recognize that I'm going to have a different conversation with Jude than I do with my brown-haired, little Irish, very, very pale-skinned white sons as they grow up. So,
Well, my response to that would be, the statistics may say that, but it's not really because of the color of his skin. That really, to me, has nothing to do with it. And really,
Right.
it's right there in her home. It's going to make the difference in the lives of both of those young men, or all of her sons. Okay. Now there's a false narrative out there, and this is what police believe. Police officers truly believe that when they are in the presence of a black male, it's a deadly force situation. This young man that was running through the streets of Kenosha with the rifle. If that had been a black man, he would have been shot dead. No question.
100%.
Yeah.
No question at all. Agree with
But
you.
because he was white, you see, he wasn't viewed as a threat. And so so I don't think we should ever judge anyone, your child or not your child, simply by the color of their skin. I think she's bought into the rhetoric and the false narrative that's out there. Now, she does have to have conversations, though, with her children,
Yeah.
about how to interact with police. The young men here in my congregation, I minister in an underserved area, and so I talk to them all the time. You comply. Whether you're right, wrong, or whatever, you comply always with that officer, because he's in a position of authority, and don't give him any reason to shoot you. And if there's an issue with it, we'll address it later, but I teach them to comply with the police.
I think that statement is a statement that's made out of a very vast disconnect. I too, Verlon, am an executive in corporate America, along with preaching. And right this very moment, as a young black man, I can go put on clothes, and I have those clothes, and go to a certain part of town and project myself to be something that I'm not, where I could intentionally be profiled, all the while still being a preacher and still being an executive that wears a shirt and a tie to work every day. And I think that's where we run into those problems where we have some kind of way put this dehumanization label on people, and we don't look at them like they are creations of whom God breathed into the breath of life. These are people. And to say that, it would be appropriate in any way to racially profile your own child, I think just screams there's some kind of disconnect there that that perhaps we see and feel as Black people that maybe she does not.
We've got about 10, 15 minutes, and I really would like for us to talk a little bit about the concept of Black Lives Matter. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, the Chronicle's been doing coverage since George Floyd died in police custody in Minneapolis. And we've received a lot of positive response to the coverage we've done, both from white readers and Black readers, but we've also received a lot of not positive response from white readers who get really emotional with the term Black Lives Matter. I know white Christians who are just, I'm never going to watch the NBA or Major League Baseball again because these players are striking, and we're, what they will say is race is not an issue. We fought the civil rights battle. We were a post-racial society. Why do you keep talking about race? All lives matter. Shouldn't Christians be concerned not about the color of your skin, but about your soul, and those kind of things? And it is just, some of the responses will be really long, negative emails with a sentence at the bottom: by the way, I'm not a racist. I have a Black neighbor who lives 3 houses down, or something like that. And I'm just wondering, why is this so emotional? We've written about, part of it is the Black Lives Matter organization itself has some bullet points on its agenda about LGBT community support, about the nuclear family, not maybe the idea of male family leadership. I'm just curious. I'm rambling as I did on the first question, but I would just love some insight from your guys on why fellow Christians, some of them at least, respond that way. Brother Barry, I know both of us got a really long unsigned letter about that very issue. So I would just welcome some thoughts and maybe some advice, or, how do we respond to that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, Bobby, I think you hit one of the key points, when you were talking there a moment ago, is that some people are not acknowledging that there is a problem. And so the reason Black males are being killed by police because police officers don't believe that Black lives matter. And until they do, it's going to continue to happen. They're bad police officers. I don't want to paint the whole group with a broad brush. I have members of my congregation who are officers. I have family members and so forth. But then the other issue here is that they look at the resume and the background of some of the people who started the movement. Okay, and I could talk all day, on this, but if you looked at the background of some of the people that Jesus selected as his 12 apostles, had questionable things in their backgrounds, and even in Christianity, that they're people under the umbrella of Christianity. They go and they'll blow up an abortion, and kill people. That's wrong, but I'm not going to separate myself from Christianity because someone did something in the name of Christianity. That doesn't make sense. And so I think that, they've really got to stop there's some things going on inside of them that they need to address and deal with. And then they'll be able to stop and say, okay, yeah, there's really a problem that we have. And I know our time is limited, so I'm just going to stop there.
I was just going to jump in, and Bobby, we had done a conversation earlier when we talked about the idea of microaggressions. And I definitely talk about that, and I'm sure, Kevin, you recognize that too in your industry as well, what those are and how it kind of plays out, of course, in the workplace. But I really wanted to drive home that those same microaggressions really occur within the church, because we're all at fault for sometimes having certain, having certain misconceptions about the people that we're interacting with, right? So for those who may not know, who are listening to this particular discussion, microaggressions are those small kind of racial slights that people make, just that really make a person feel marginalized about who they are. And it's not even a matter of thinking you're doing something wrong. It's just kind of what you know. That could be a simple thing, right? Like saying, can I touch your hair? I've never seen hair like that before. Or I've shared before where there may be a young a Puerto Rican woman who comes in with her child, and all of a sudden it's like, we have a Spanish-speaking course, a session that's available that you might want to do. Or one of the ones that I've personally experienced is when I have taught a Bible class, and someone has said to me, you really were able to grasp that information so well, and you spoke so articulately. That was great. So these are small things that people may see as more just being inquisitive or just being complimentary in some ways that can really kind of hurt a person. And so I think then that one of the huge ones that what I'm hearing, of course, is that the whole idea of Black lives don't matter because I don't see color. Well, I need you to see color because I need you to see that I am a diverse person. That's a huge microaggression. And I think like that's part of where people are coming from, is not really understanding that these things aren't necessarily the way that we should be interacting with one another. And the other thing that I've said, I do a lot of these conversations within my company, and that question always comes up. What do we do about the whole controversy around Black Lives Matter? And I said, we have to make people understand it from their perspective. So when I'm talking to people about insurance, I bring up the idea around, hey, if a house is burning in a neighborhood, do you send the fire trucks to every single house? You do not. You go to the house that's burning, you put that fire out, and then you're concerned about what implications that may have for the other ones, or if another house is catching on fire. For our Christian brothers and sisters, I love to talk about the parable of the lost sheep, right? Jesus, God is not saying, hey, I don't care about those other 99 sheep. I only care about the one sheep. What he's saying is that sheep is the lost one. Let me reach out to the lost one and bring them back. I care about and love all of them. So what I would say to everyone is that put it in perspective of who you're talking with. Help them to understand from their perspective of, hey, whether it's a biblical reference or insurance reference or anything else, right? Healthcare reference, help people to kind of understand it from that perspective. And then maybe that will open their heart a little bit more to understand the importance of why Black Lives Matter.
I want to chime in and say a couple of things just relative to the organization Black Lives Matter and saying Black Lives Matter and believing Black Lives Matter.
Sure.
I think there is an opportunity to be quick to listen and slow to speak. And hopefully if we can have that conversation like we're doing now, and we can be quick to listen and slow to speak, we can develop some discernment in the organization Black Lives Matter and the ideology that Black Lives Matter. I think there is confusion where we are saying Black Lives Matter because Black lives, Verlon, are that one sheep. And we've got to go find that one sheep. And at the same time, there's this organization that is named Black Lives Matter that stands for things that perhaps they disagree with, like the breakup of a Christian model for a family and other different things. I think we have got to, as Christian people, develop discernment between the organization and saying it and the idea that there are a people who are hurting, and we can, with those people, weep together and rejoice together, all while disagreeing with what an organization stands for. Saying Black Lives Matter and believing Black Lives Matter is not the organization. And I just think that if we can some kind of way have the conversation and develop some discernment and just listen, we actually probably would agree in some cases.
Brother Ed's comments right there just kind of capture exactly my my thoughts as in terms of Black Lives Matter. I absolutely, I kind of disagree with the diversion of, well, all lives matter. I think that the idea that Black Lives Matter is something that we as Christians ought to endorse. And what I mean by that is the idea that I think there needs to be, and even in my own personally, I think that there is a need for kind of a greater recognition of our history, both as churches and as members of this country, the history of racial subordination, the history of and in particular as it relates to the situation with policing. I think there is a great need for that, and I think that sort of as white brothers and sisters, we need to recognize the problem, as several of the panelists have said, the problems, I should say, plural. I do also, I have not, for instance, joined or encouraged joining protests associated with the Black Lives Matter organization or movement. My concern with the Black Lives Matter movement is less with the kind of this rhetoric you hear about, oh, it's Marxist inspired, critical race theory inspired, or like some of the things that have been mentioned about the official kind of criticism of the Western nuclear family. Those might be concerning, but more why I don't sort of affiliate with the organization as opposed to the concept, like Brother Red said, is sort of the diagnosis. Again, why are we seeing these things and what needs to be done? I think the diagnosis of the organization is that the police are systematically targeting Black people, and I don't think that's the case. I think that their solution is the kind of sort of some what I would consider potentially indiscriminate reforms. The sort of this idea of defund the police, while I think has some merit, the idea of our communities, of us as communities, doing sort of, some functions that we're sort of sloughing off onto police right now. I think in general that's a good idea, but I'm concerned about sort of the sort of abrupt implementation. And again, what I talked about earlier, the potential for a kind of more generalized delegitimation of police, and particularly in community, and that could have, I think, adverse effects in communities where it's most needed and most important. That's really my objection to affiliating with the organization, as opposed to, like I said, I think we should loud and clear be saying Black Lives Matter, and they haven't mattered enough in our institutions and in our churches.
Well, I'm so appreciative of all of you taking time for all of your insights. I guess before we end this discussion, any final thoughts, any big questions that I should have asked that I didn't ask, or are we comfortable with kind of adjourning this conversation and taking
Bobby,
later?
you did a good job. I did want to just something that Ben mentioned, defunding of the police. I think to me that's kind of like hyperbole, because you can't really do that. But to me, what the real issue is, and probably, I don't know if any of you on here are old enough to remember this, but when Ronald Reagan was president, he decertified the Air Traffic Controllers Union. To me, the problem is the police unions. If I was Donald Trump, I'd decertify all of them with an executive order, and that would solve many of the problems.
Great. Hearing no other comments, I'm so appreciative and so thankful, and really appreciate all of you. And I guess we will talk to you later.
All right, thanks a lot, and good to
Thank you
meet
so
all
much.
of you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
Okay.
Take care.
Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.